Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. It's good to see you. I am so very excited about today. Perhaps my most hotly anticipated plane is sitting here right in front of us. This is the Rotate MD-80. I had the opportunity to get a hold of a pre-release copy of this plane to record a video and sort of learn the ins and the outs so that we can have some coverage as day one rolls out for this plane. I have no idea when this thing's actually going to be released, so whenever you're seeing this, hey, it's here, finally. Like I said, this is without question probably the plane that I've been looking forward to the most this entire year. And honestly, I will say, after flying this thing for a couple of days, while it is not without its problems, it is such an absolute joy to go up in the skies with. And we'll kind of hit on some of the good points, and we'll talk about some of the bad points and some of the things that still need to be worked on. But I really, really enjoy this product, and I think that it's going to be a huge, huge product for our community. So let me preface this entire video by saying I am working with a pre-release copy of this plane. As far as everything I've been told leads me to believe that this is likely to be the final version, but there's a possibility that we're going to see things and things are going to behave in such a way that may not be indicative of the final product. So big disclaimer, we'll put it in big letters right up on top of the screen right now. Hey, this isn't the final version of the plane, but it is definitely a doozy. So let's go ahead and we'll hop in this cockpit here and we'll take a look at what we got. Today's flight, we're going to be flying from Buffalo down to LaGuardia. A couple of my very good friends will be joining us. In fact, we might even have the opportunity to see them landing very soon. I want to thank Mr. Stealthbob, Mr. Josh Gibbs, Mr. Chevy Rules, and we'll see if anybody else happens to come join us. But we're going to have some folks to look at on our way down there. I kind of wanted to do a flight on the other side of the country to showcase a few different airports and to also just focus more on the product itself as opposed to the procedures and sort of the ATC and everything that's going on around us. So we're going to be flying from Buffalo down to LaGuardia. Have some payware scenery that I picked up, and I have payware here at Buffalo that honestly I think looks fantastic. And then I have New York City XP, which models the city of New York, the skyscrapers, the photoreal scenery, all sorts of beautiful stuff, and then the New York City airport. So we're going to fly into some of that. And let me tell you, man, that scenery is incredible. You'll definitely see some cool stuff as we're coming in. So here we are. We're inside the cockpit. We're cold and dark right now. So let's take a look around this thing, and we'll go ahead and start. We'll start pre-flighting and getting this thing ready for consumption. So I'm gonna walk my flows. We'll go left to right, top to bottom. And one thing I will say is that this plane is it's a handful. It's a handful because it behaves like the 732, where there's knobs and switches and buttons everywhere, and you've got dials telling you information. And it's not like the 57 or the 320 or the 330 where the button lights up and says, hey, I've got a problem. It's like, nah, you got to actually look at the dial and say, I think that thing's okay, or I think that thing's got a problem. But it also combines the sort of the 757 with a little bit of the glass feel and the FMC and the automation. So it's been a handful, but it's also been super fun to fly. So let's get this thing going. We're going to go ahead and start we need to get the battery and the APU online so we can start programming this sucker. So the battery is here. We'll move that down to the on position. Now we need to get the APU up and running once we have the battery. So we have to turn the APU start pump on. Without the start pump, nothing happens, by the way. That thing provides fuel to the APU and the engines. And the APU starter will fire, but the APU itself will never actually start up. And you'll be sitting here scratching your head like, what is going on? So once the start pump is on, we'll go ahead and turn the APU on, grab the APU switch, move it to the start position, and let go. We'll sit here for just a moment. You will note that the APU percentage RPM gauge starts to increase, and we'll start to see the EGT rise. As the RPMs begin to rise, we'll know that the APU is ready because we will see the APU power available light up, just like that. We'll go ahead and flip on then the generator left, the generator right. Now we'll start to hear this plane come to life. You'll start to hear the avionics fans and all sorts of noises happening in the background. Once the APU power's on, we're going to go ahead and turn on the APU air conditioning button, which is essentially the APU bleed. One of the other things about this plane is that nothing is named the way that you know that it should be named, or you think that it should be named. So the air conditioning colder button, we're going to move to the on position. That's done, and we'll kind of walk through some of the flows here before we do our first checklist. So we're going to want to turn the left and right generators on for the engines. We can bring the start pump off for the time being. Arm the emergency exit lights, turn on the no smoking of the seatbelt signs, The fuel tanks will come back to here momentarily. Ice protection, we're not worried about any of that just yet. IRS mode select, we'll come back to that in a bit. We'll turn the lights on here in a bit as well. We'll go ahead and turn on the logo light, crank on the yaw damper. And then we get down to the air conditioning section. The supply valves are also known as the bleeds anywhere else. We'll move both of those over to auto, and we'll start to see pressurization hit the system. We'll also start to see the cabin, the supply temperature to the cabin come up. And eventually we'll see the cabin rise above 0 Fahrenheit, where it is nice and chilly back there for the passengers. Pressurization system, we'll deal with that later. So that's the overhead panel. That's sort of our pre-flight status, our pre-flight state that we want to put that in. So then we'll move on to the very first of our checklists, the pre-flight cockpit safety inspection checklist. So parking brake is set. Battery switch we've turned on. Engine igniters we have off. Windshield wipers are also off. The landing lights are off and retracted. Yes, sir, they are. The radar is currently turned off. APU external power, the APU is on, and APU is running and providing juice to us, so that's checked. Left and right APU buses are both on. APU air is on. Pneumatic pressure we have checked, and we verified that the pneumatic has pressure. Cockpit floodlights we don't need. Display intensities, we'll check that here in just a moment. Emergency lights have been armed. Cabin lights are both on. Then the fuel pump and cross bleeds, we've checked those. They're off and in the down position. So that is the cockpit safety inspection checklist. One of the things that we kind of hit on there, we'll talk about how the lighting system works in here. First of all, we'll talk about the yoke. The yoke works, the yoke moves, but good lord, this yoke is in the way. So we click right there, yoke goes away. No more yoke for the rest of the flight. So there's 3 knobs that control the lighting in the cockpit, and you'll see these knobs replicated elsewhere in the cockpit. All of them seem to be linked. So the panel knobs are all linked to the same knob. The digital knob is all linked, and the floodlights are all linked. So down here in the bottom left-hand corner, just to the left of the navigation display, we can crank these panel knobs up a little bit, get some lighting in this. We'll go ahead and turn the digital knob all the way up. That handles the digital displays, and we'll turn the floodlights up just a little bit there to have some ambient lighting, set the mood for the flight that we're about to have. Cockpit preparation checklist. Engine sync selector is currently off. Annunciators are all tested and look good. Air conditioning shutoff switch is auto. Windshield anti-ice switch, we'll turn that on. Yaw damper is on. The ART switch is over here. That is on auto. Landing gear lever is down and locked. Engine oil temp and quantity. We have oil and it has a temperature, so that's checked. Hydraulic quantity. Hydraulics also have a quantity, but no pressure. We'll take care of that in a little bit. That's checked. Primary stabilizer trim, tested, I guess. We'll go with that. Secondary stabilizer trim is turned off. Tow and trim calculations, or takeoff weight and trim calculations, we'll get there in a second. We're not worried about that. Cabin pressure controls on auto. We'll be landing at sea level, so we can set that just like so. So we'll set the landing altitude there. That's set. Fuel shutoff levers are both in the off position. Checked and checked. Takeoff warning thrust. We'll say that's probably good. Stall warning is probably good. Max speed warning is probably good. Everybody likes a good fire test. I don't know why in this world we like a fire test, but we'll test both of those. So engine 2 fire test. Fire, right engine. And the engine 1 fire test. Fire, left. Thank you, Betty. Engine. That is tested. Radar is currently off. So the fuel quantity is currently in kilos. We're going to switch that real quick over to pounds. We can come down to the FMC, MCDU, whatever the hell we're going to call this thing today. Hit the menu button, go to the aircraft management page, and click the button that says weight kilos change. Now it'll say weight in pounds. So fuel quantity, we're currently looking at 20,386 pounds. That's checked. And that is, master caution is checked and master caution is now checked and cleared. We're not worried about any of those cautions. So that is the cockpit preparation checklist. Next thing that we want to do is hop down in here in the FMC, and we'll get this thing programmed, set up, and so we can get ready to get the hell out of here. So the first thing we want to do, we need to get the IRS aligned. So we'll hit the init ref button. We'll hit position. We're currently at Buffalo, KBUF, Kilo, Bravo, Uniform, Foxtrot. That'll give us a GPS coordinate here. You'll notice that we can't set the IRS position yet. That's because we want to go to the overhead panel. IRS mode select. We're going to set that over to nav. Hop ourselves back down here to the FMC. Now we can grab the coordinates, put those in the IRS. Thing to note on the IRS, they have decided to use an abbreviated alignment sequence. It'll take about 30 seconds or so for the IRS to align, as opposed to the normal, I'm assuming, 7 to 10 or whatever minutes that it would take. I kind of like that. That's a good segue into pointing out that I don't think anybody is going to call this a study-level sim. There are a number of functions that are simply not simulated. It seems that Rotate has decided to follow the Aerosoft mentality more than the PMDG mentality. Let's make a plane that flies well from the left seat. Let's map the functions that are necessary for flight, but we're not going to worry about extraneous things like, does that circuit breaker actually work? I'm okay with that, but your mileage may vary. Position is all set, so the next thing we need to do is set up our route. Head over to the route page. We're going to be coming from KBUF, which is what we programmed in already. We're going to be heading to LaGuardia, KLGA, Kilo Lima Golf Alpha. We'll go with that. So now that we have the route plugged in, we'll go ahead and move on to the departures page, departing and arriving page. We're heading out of KBUF today. We'll be departing from runway number 23. There is no SID we're going to take, and there is no transition we're going to take. So we'll go ahead and get that punched in. We'll head back over to the departure and arrival page, plug in our LaGuardia arrival. We're going to fake things up a little bit just so we have a nice, pretty arrival. So we'll be coming in today on the HARP 3 arrival. That's going to be that guy right there. Via no transition, it looks like. Oh, no, via the RKA transition. We'll take that. And we're going to plan for the RNAV runway 13 approach. It's going to be a really nice one from SpinM. So with that plugged in now, we'll go plug in the rest of the route here. So if we head back over to the route page, click on the next page button, you're going to see that we start to see some discontinuities. How does the plane get to the HARP 3 arrival? So we're going to start off by putting in the GEE VOR, GEE, put that in right there. That'll be a direct 2. After the GEE VOR is going to come the AUDIL waypoint, AUDIL, AUDIL. Put that right there. That's going to eliminate that discontinuity. And then the RKA VOR, Romeo Kilo Alpha. Kill that. So we're going to come into the routes page, or the legs page, I should say, mess around with the route a little bit. Normally, we would be vectored after Crowley and put onto the arrival, or the approach, I should say. We're gonna fudge that. So let's get rid of the LaGuardia VOR, because we don't need that in here. And then we want to look at the GPS for runway 13. After Crowley, we're going to want to go to SpinM and then Dookie. So we'll put in SpinM here. SPINM. And then we have another discontinuity. We just delete that. All right, so Dookie is going to be 220 knots. Put that in 220. So we're going to set our speed restrictions and our altitude restrictions up. Make sure everything looks good. So we'll go ahead and punch the 180 speed restriction into Rustum. We have another discontinuity between Rustum and Uki. We can just delete that because that is a direct. And then we have Addons Used, and then we're down on the ground. With the route plugged into our FMC, we're going to pop over to the left panel here, change this knob over to plan, and this is going to allow us to look at the masterpiece for which we have just created. Make sure we're on the legs page. We'll go to page number 1 here, like so, and then we'll hit the step button. As we're hitting step, we're going to be watching the map and our navigation display, and just making sure that everything is connected and looks okay. That looks fantastic to me. I hope you guys agree with that. So that's going to be our flight. That's going to be our arrival. That's going to be our approach. I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty stoked about this. Next thing we need to do is hop over to the menu page, head over to the perf tab, and we'll start loading some weights in here. I went ahead and preloaded the fuel, preloaded all the passengers, and everything ready to go. So we're going to have 20,000 pounds of fuel. It gives us a zero fuel weight of 119,000 once we take into account the passengers. I've loaded 5 extra 1,000 pounds of fuel in reserve of that. We're flying a cost index today of 80, because why the hell not? Our cruising altitude is going to be flight level 270, so 27,000 feet. We'll pop that there. And our transition altitude here in the United States is 10,000 feet. That allows us to then complete the perf tab, head over to the takeoff tab. We can set the outside air temperature automatically. Currently we're at 3 degrees. We are not going to flex this takeoff. We'll be doing a toga takeoff. Now with the V speeds, we could hit the button and it'll plug in the speeds for us. However, it determines the speeds based on the current flap setting. Since we're sitting here at the gate, we have no flaps set. So I'm going to go ahead and reference the handy-dandy charts that have been given us and pull the V speeds down for our current weight, and we'll plug those in. With a gross weight of 139,000 pounds and a flap setting of 215. We're going to be looking at 136 on the V1. So 136. Big difference in numbers there. 141 on the rotate. And then 149 on V2. That's going to give us a climb out speed of about 154 knots. We're not going to program that in. We're going to just set our speed to 250. Get out of here. Last thing we need to do is configure the glare shield. Now, I will say the autopilot and whatnot in this plane is bizarre at best. There's a lot of things that were not super intuitive to me right away. Perhaps people that are more familiar with this airframe will have a do a better job flying this out the gate. But I had to learn some new concepts, and I definitely had problems on my first few takeoffs. But I'm at a point now, knock on wood here, where I feel like I have a good grasp on what's going on. So we'll move left to right to begin with. We're going to move our speed knob all the way up to 250 knots. Because essentially we're going to accelerate ourselves, and then we will let the FMC take over. And the FMC controls our speed by manipulating thrust. It manipulates the EPR values for the plane. So it's just going to go and go and go until it gets to wherever it's going. So 250 knots. We'll set the initial heading of runway heading, which is 235 degrees. So 235 degrees. We're going to plan for a climb out speed. This is going to be after we hit acceleration altitude. We're going to plan for a climb out rate of about 1,500 feet per minute. So we'll be flying out 235, 1,500 feet per minute, and we'll be at toga thrust. So that's going to allow us to accelerate up towards the 250 knot mark. And then the last thing is normally we would put in whatever altitude ATC has given us. I'm going to plug in 27,000 feet because I'm lazy. Now, one thing I will say about plugging in altitudes in this plane, after you plug in the altitude, always make sure you push that button right there. Okay, this plane, you dial in an altitude, and then you have to tell it, I want to actually stop at that altitude. It behaves very similarly, I should say, to the CRJ. I think the CRJ 200 does that, but definitely to the de Havilland Q400. If you don't plug in your altitude, the plane will happily fly right past those altitudes. Don't ask me how I know that information. So we have our speed, our heading, our vertical speed, our altitude mode. The only thing that we need to configure is the takeoff thrust rating. So we'll set that down here. We can go takeoff flex, go around, maximum. Well, I'm actually not sure what MCT stands for. Somebody can correct me on that. Climb and cruise, but we're going to set for takeoff. This will essentially give us toga. With that set, we can come back up to our speed panel here. Click on the EPR button. That's going to say set the EPR all the way to the takeoff position. And then we'll take the heading knob and pull it out, and that's going to put us in heading select mode. So now we have a glare shield that is configured exactly the way that I want it to be. We need to set some trim values. That's about all we have left. So we'll take the trim values. You have this little mechanical trim calculator. If you set your flaps to whatever your takeoff flap is, and you set your center of gravity to whatever that happens to be, it'll tell you what you should set your trim to. So in this case, we're going to go to about 10.5. So the trim values are marked here. If we pull this big ass knob down, you'll start to see it move slowly. You're also going to hear that noise. That noise you're going to hear the whole flight, and it's going to drive you insane. But that's indicating that there is movement on the trim wheel. Seriously, it's going to drive you nuts. It already has me. Pop on down to our radio stack here. We're on 123.45. That's going to keep comms nice and quiet. We'll go ahead and set our fake transponder over here as the last thing that we do. The transponder knob is a little bit different from other ones. The bottom knob tells you which digit you're going to select. And then the top knob says, what am I going to set that to? So we're going to go to 2, 2, 0, and 0. We'll pretend we're on VATSIM today. So 2200, and we'll go ahead and squawk altitude. With that out of the way, we're ready to move on to the flight plan. I don't even know if this is called a checklist. We'll call this the flight plan checklist because it's what it's in here as. Flight plan's been filed, ATIS and weather brief. Sure, we've done that. We'll do that later. Clearance has been received. The FGCP, MCP, FMC, MCDO, whatever the hell we're calling it today, is checked and set. AHRS alignment's completed. FMC has been checked and cross-checked. Required fuel's been checked and is on board. Altimeters. Altimeters here at Buffalo are 3042, so we'll set those. Unusually high pressure today, this week in the U.S. That is set. Airspeed bugs have been set and cross-checked. Navigation radios have been set. Flight instruments have been checked. ATC frequencies are all good to go. That's the flight plan checklist completed. With that being done, we're going to go ahead and call the push truck and start to get ready to get out of here. We'll go ahead and call the JAR pushback truck out here. If you recall, we tried to use this, the 748. it didn't work. It actually works on this plane. So we'll call him over, let him get in place. So he's locked in place. We're ready for pushback. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wait right now as there is some traffic crossing from right to left. I'm sure we'll see that traffic start to move here in just a moment. There he goes. Josh Gibbs, everybody, in the beautiful Pilot Edge livery. Check this thing out, man. Thanks, Tyler Walton, for putting this together. Flight SciTech. Thing looks incredible. Ignore the fact that his wheel's sinking slightly below the ground. It happens. Looks like we pushed back far enough. We'll tell the pushback truck to go away. Pull our parking brake out. Now we're ready for a before start checklist. Before start checklist, parking brakes have been set. Thrust levers are at idle. APU air is turned on. Pneumatic cross-feed levers. These are very important. If you do not pull these two levers up, you will not start these engines. Don't ask me how I know. Pneumatic pressure is too low at 10, so we're going to turn off the air supply, turn the bleeds off, and we'll see the pneumatic pressure come up above 35, which is what we need for start. Air conditioning supply switches have been turned off, which give us now crossfeed. We will turn on all of our fuel tanks. Pushback clearance has been received, startup clearance has been received, engine igniters are going to go. We're going to use System B today for the igniters. When I say System B, I really meant System B. Anti-collision lights we can now bring on, like so, and that is the before start checklist. So let's get these engines going. Start the engines up. We want to make sure we have enough pneumatic pressure, which we do. We'll turn the start pumps on, and we'll go ahead and start with engine number 2, grabbing the starter switch, pulling it down. We'll see some movement on N2. We're waiting for that to hit 24% and stabilize, and then we'll go ahead and give gas to engine number 2. EGT's rising. N1's coming up. Looks like one good engine to me. Hop back on the overhead panel here. We'll turn the starter off for the right engine. Close the guard there. Open the guard for the left engine. Begin starting engine number 1. N2's coming up. 24%, give it gas. Successful start on both of our engines. We'll go ahead and crank off the left starter, close the valve, turn the ignition off, turn off the starter pumps. Moving over to the first officer's seat here, we'll turn on the hydro pumps for both engines. We'll also turn the auxiliary and the transfer pumps on. That'll pressurize the hydraulic system, and we can check the hydraulics and make sure we got pressure, which we do. After start checklist, engine igniters are both off. APU bus. We'll verify that we have power from the engines, which we do. We'll turn off both the APU buses. We can turn off the APU air. We'll bring on both the bleed valves, and we'll turn off the APU. Engine igniters are both off. APU bus is off. APU air is off. Pitot and static heaters are on captain. Airfoil and engine anti-ice are both off. Air condition supply switches are on auto. And the pneumatic frost levers are now closed. Hydraulic system has been checked and set. We have pressure, we have quantity, and we have pumps. That is the after start checklist. Moving straight into the taxi checklist. Actually, let's get some lights on to move into the taxi checklist. Light her up like a Christmas tree. Taxi checklist. Taxi clearance has been received. Taxi lights are on. TRP, ART are set as required. 00 on the aileron and rudder trim. The stabilizer trim is set for 10.5. Transponder is currently on altitude 2200. Anti-ice is set. Takeoff briefing has been performed. We're going to be taking off. Runway heading 235, climbing up to 250 knots and 27,000 feet. Once we're at a safe altitude, we will turn direct to our first waypoint. And the cabin report's been obtained. That's the taxi checklist. Let's get out of here. Quick bounce of the flight controls. We'll knock our flaps down to 15. So one thing worth noting, our differential braking doesn't currently work on this plane. I intend to file a bug report, assuming it is not fixed in the post-release version. So I have had to make a bind on my plane that sets brakes to being used. That's kind of tough to get used to, but you know, that's not a hugely major thing in my mind. It's one of those that we can adapt to. This thing handles super well on the ground, handles super well in the skies. It has been an absolute joy to fly this guy. The long fuselage makes things interesting, to say the least. It is a very, very different feel from other planes. You're going to find yourself flying nose high and landing nose high, just because of the big sweeping wings that are located kind of to the rear of the plane. Get to stare at the ascent in one of these awesome HD CSLs. These have not been released to the public just yet. I'm not sure if they're going to be released to the public, but big shout out to Mr. Flight SciTech for putting these together. Got our first 320 taking the runway to get out of here. All these guys are heading down to LaGuardia with us. All three of those takeoffs out of the way, the runway is now ours. We've been instructed to line up and wait by an ATC that doesn't exist. We'll crank up there, turn the wings lights completely on, make sure all of our lights are on, and we'll run through our before takeoff checklist. Before takeoff checklist, takeoff date has been confirmed. Runway heading has been checked and set. Clearance has been received. Departure and first fix are set. Engine igniters onto System B. Engine and wing anti-ice are off. EOAP is off. Bank angle at 15 degrees. Set. ART switches on auto. TRP and FMA are both on takeoff. Fuel balance has been checked. Spoilers are armed. Spoilers are armed. Stabilizer trim has been set. Auto brakes to RTO. set. And lights are set for takeoff. That is the takeoff checklist. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the engines up to about 50% or so on the N1. Once we see that they are stabilized, we're going to hit the auto throttles, and off we go. So we'll rotate, and we will climb out at about a 20-degree angle once we are off the ground, and we'll climb there until we reach 1,700 feet, at which point we will engage the FMS EPR limit, and off we go. So let's scoot. Takeoff power set. Airspeed alive. 100 knots. V1 and a rotate. Positive rate, gear up. $1,700 feet, we'll turn the autopilot on. Nose is going to come down. Shoot us for that 1,500 feet per minute. We'll engage the VNAV. That's going to set us to FMS EPR. We'll turn off the nose lights. FMS is now commanding our climb. We'll start to move the flaps up. We'll start with the speed brake. Verifying the auto brake. Turn off some lights. As the speed approaches 250 knots, we'll start to see the nose come back up and resume the climb. After takeoff checklist, landing gear is up, lights are out, engine igniters can come off. Air conditioning and pressure. Pressure has pressure. Air conditioning has air conditioning. Bank angle will set to 30. Oops. I'll leave that heading at 235. We'll set the bank angle to 30. Art switches on auto. Flaps and slats are up and retracted. Auto brake is off. TRP, we'll set that to climb. We're coming into some moisture with an outside air temperature of -2, so we'll crank on the icing. Or anti-ice, I should say. Engine and airfoil can both come on. Hydraulic auxiliary and transfer pumps, both of those can come off. Center fuel pumps will leave on. Altimeters will leave set as they are. That is the after takeoff checklist. Climbing at a pretty good rate here, so we'll make a left turn and we'll head direct to our next waypoint. So I'm just spinning the needle around to get us pointed in the general direction. We can come down out of the FMC, hit the direct intersection page, hit G, put that down in the direct 2. And then we'll move over to nav. Verify nav track, verify VNAV climb. And we're off. Crossing 10,000 feet, nose down, start our acceleration. Means we can start cranking some lights off. Climb checklist, altimeters are still set to 3042. Transition altitudes crossed. We'll continue monitoring aircraft and engine performance. Crossing RKA VOR, now we're approaching top of descent. That'll be our next thing to care about. We're 27 miles out from that, about 4 more minutes here. So since we're in VNAV mode and we're flying off the FMC, all we need to do is reduce our altitude to where we want to go. I'm going to set our altitude down to our crossing altitude of 9,000 at Basie. So we'll plug that sucker in. As we cross that top of descent, we'll start to see the nose push down just a little bit. We'll enable the, our VNAV mode will be enabled for the descent. Throttles will come back. We'll maintain a speed of about 253 knots. We'll start making our way into New York City here. Now, as I was singing the FMC's praises for the VNAV system, it looks as though it was not going to make Basie at 10,000 feet. So I have had to manually intervene. I'm allowing the FMC to manage my speed and my track. However, I am managing the vertical speed now to try to get us down another 12,000 feet by the time we hit the Basie VOR, our Basie intersection. I think we're probably going to cross that a little high, though. Coming up on Basie, another 5 miles. We still got to get down 5,000 or 6,000 feet, so we're not going to make that crossing. So by the time we'll be 2,000 feet will be our next altitude. That'll get us down to Spinham, and then we can work on the arrival from there. New York City is starting to come into view. Love the scenery for this airport, or for this entire city, really. This New York Airports XP and New York City XP, both fantastic packages. Will be in the links down below. We start thinking about the approach. Want to start thinking about speed. Head over to the menu page, click on the approach button here, and we're going to be landing flaps 40, so that's going to give us a VREF of 137 and an approach speed of about 142 knots. Winds at LaGuardia, we're looking at 190 at 7, so we will have a slight crosswind. The landing that we're doing is probably not ideal and probably not what you would normally do, but it's pretty, and that's what I'm after today. Get some speed brakes out here. Perhaps the most satisfying speed brakes to pull. Big thunk, thunk, thunk. 250 knots, what we're looking at. Crossing 10,000 feet, we want to make sure we get some lights going. So we'll bring on the wing landing lights. We'll bring on the floodlights and the wing lights. Put those speed brakes back in. Give it control of the VNav back to the FMC. We'll let it handle the speed of the descent because it seems to have caught up with itself now. Welcome to Spin-M, and welcome to the GPS runway 13 approach. 9 more miles till we cross Dookie. We need to make sure that we are 2,000 feet or above and 220 knots hitting Dookie. See the George Washington Bridge up here in front of us, and downtown Manhattan off to our 11 o'clock or so. Let's go ahead and do some checklists here. A couple of flows, get things in order. Take a look at the approach checklist. We've completed the approach briefing. Cabin signs are both armed. Spoilers are retracted and disarmed. Nav radios are set. Fuel pumps are on. Airspeed bugs have been set. Altimeters are set. Approach checklist is completed. Flaps to 15. Plane has slowed down in advance of Dookie. That's good. 220 knots. One thing to note with this plane, the manual dictates that you do not have the speed brakes enabled when you pull the gear down or push the flaps out. In fact, they say do not use the speed brakes at all when the flaps are out or you risk having a stall. So we leave the speed brakes disarmed until the gear is completely down. While we're out of here, we'll set the auto brake. .2,000 feet above by Rustem. Speed's going to continue coming back now to 180 knots. That will drop our gear. Gear down 3 green. Bring the flaps out to 24. Final approach checklist. Final approach fix has been verified. Crossing altitude. Gears down 3 green. Flaps are currently at 24. Will be at 40. Spoilers are now armed. Auto brakes are set for medium. Engine igniters will bring over to system A. EOP is checked, and the bank angle is going to be set for 15 degrees. That is the That is the landing checklist. With that, my aircraft. Disable the autopilot. And first officer, if you'd be so kind, also disable the auto throttle. Above 1300 by the time we get to Uki. Let that speed bleed back to our final approach speed. Look at that beautiful sight there. Oh man, this is a cool approach. Central Park just off our nose.
Delta 80 LaGuardia Tower, you're clear land, runway 13.
Clear land 13, Delta 80. Runway's in sight. Forgot to check what the minimums are, but I'm assuming we're crossing them, and we're good. A little bit on the fast side, we can take care of that as soon as we roll off here. Runway's in sight, runway's clear. One last quick check, gears down 3 green, flaps are down and now 40. Auto brake's armed, speed brake is armed. Clearance has been received. Here we go. Reverser's out. Manual braking.
Delta 80, welcome LaGuardia off at Lima, contact ground 121.7, good day.
Over to ground, 21.7. Mr. Josh Gibbs, everybody. Alright. Pull off here. We'll turn on the starter pump, start bringing the APU online. I don't actually know where to park. I'll come over here next to my buddies. Make ourselves around, get our lights set. After landing checklist, flaps and slats are up. Spoiler's been retracted. Engine igniters can come off. Auto brake is disarmed. For real that time. Radar is off. Pitot and static heats can come off. Airfoil engine anti-ice is off. And radar is actually really off this time. After landing checklist complete. Partners in crime over here on the left. I think we lost one on the way. Take spot Charlie 42 here. Parking brake. Back to the overhead. We'll turn on the APU gen. Turn on the APU air. Turn off the seatbelt signs. And engine 1 comes off. Engine 2 comes off. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York LaGuardia Airport. Local time is 1:20 p.m. Before we do our outro here, parking shutdown checklist. Cabin signs are off and off. Well, one's off. Fuel pumps can come off. Air conditioning panel is set where it needs to be. APU external power is set. Fuel levers are down. Flight director has been turned off. Anti-collision lights are now off. Transponder over to standby. Emergency lights are off. Well, now they're off. And APU is on. Battery switch is on. Parking shutdown checklist completed. So there you have it. That is the Rotate MD-80. We had a couple of problems coming in on that approach, or that arrival. I've got to do some research into what's going on with that. I've had a few VNAV issues, including today, since I've had the plane, but it's been decently well done. Honestly, like this plane, even with some of these issues, I'm having an absolute blast flying this thing, and I'm looking forward. As I sit here now, I'm looking forward to the retail release when more and more people can experience this. It is a gorgeous plane. I think that it is modeled well. It is a handful and a half to fly, and it is just a very, very unique and powerful addition to the family of planes here in X-Plane. And I look forward to seeing what what happens with this plane, and also what some other developers step up and do. So thank you everybody for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure to walk you through this plane, and I hope if you do decide to buy it that you truly do enjoy it. And yeah, thank you again for tuning in. Say hi in the comments. Take care, everybody.